All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining me today. I'm doing an overview of the collaborative problem solving model called CPS for short. It was developed by Dr. Ross Greene, who's written a number of books on the topic. I actually discovered his work as a parent when I was seeking some solutions to some challenging behaviors that I was seeing in my daughter here at home. But I've since learned that this is used as an overall technique in a lot of schools around the country with great success. And there's more and more research coming out about using this as an approach in classrooms. And that's the lens we'll be looking at it through today. But you can certainly keep in mind that this is a fantastic parenting technique as well. And today we're going to talk about this in 3 parts. At first, Dr. Greene asks us, he calls it to change our lenses, but really to view challenging behavior in a new way. And we'll dig into that. Then we're going to talk about how to identify lagging skills and unsolved problems as a way of modifying or changing that unwanted behavior. And then number 3, we'll actually get into the practice of how you teach those skills and solve those problems. So first, we're going to talk about the predominant view of what causes challenging behavior, and then a different way that we can look at it. So behaviorally challenging kids, the common cliches are that the children are attention-seeking, manipulative, coercive, unmotivated, limit testing. These are all really common beliefs, as are that parents are permissive, passive, inconsistent, and that these are the causes of challenging behavior. Now, luckily, there's been an enormous amount of research in the past 50 years, and we learned a lot more about challenging kids. And we've learned that the behavior modification strategies that we've been using are often counterproductive and ineffective. So Dr. Greene asked us to try on some new lenses and look with a more accurate and compassionate understanding of challenging behavior so that we have a solid foundation for what comes next. And here's the crux of it. Dr. Greene challenges to accept a radical new perspective that kids do well if they can. And I'm going to let you hear Dr. Greene talk about this idea.
I think if you're working with kids in general, but challenging kids in particular, you need a philosophy. Who is this kid? What's he about? What's he up to? If he's up to anything, because you see, your philosophy is going to guide your actions, especially when the going gets tough. No philosophy, no guide. The most important theme of collaborative problem solving is this one. Kids do well if they can. Now, nobody ever falls off their chair at the sight of kids do well if they can. It's only an earth-shattering philosophy. If you consider a much more popular alternative philosophy that floats around out there called kids do well if they wanna. Now, kids do well if they can, and kids do well if they wanna are 2 completely different philosophies. And they have completely different ramifications for what you're gonna do to or with this kid to make things better. Let's think about kids do well if they wanna for a second. If you've got a kids do well if they wanna mentality and you're working with a kid who's not doing well, then the reason you think he's not doing well by virtue of your philosophy is because he doesn't wanna. I've been thinking about kids do well if they wanna for a long time, and here's the conclusion I've come up with about kids do well if they wanna. It's wrong. Flat out, dead wrong. I ask myself, why would any kid not want to do well? Don't all of us do the best we can in the circumstances we find ourselves in? Well, the kids do well if they want a mentality has those questions covered with concepts like secondary gain, attention seeking, unmotivated, coercive, limit testing. We're going to have those babies put to bed by around 11 a.m. this morning. When you really think about them, they don't make much sense. When you really put them to the test, They don't make a great deal of sense, but let's say they do make sense. Even if kids do well if they wanna is right, and now you know I think it's wrong, it's narrow, because you see it greatly narrows the role that you can play in the life of a kid who's not doing well. Because if you think a kid isn't doing well because he doesn't wanna, I can only think of one thing for you to do, only one role for you to play in the life of this kid, make him wanna. And we have the technology for making kids wanna. How do you make a kid wanna? You reward the behaviors you like and you punish the behaviors you don't. You give him the incentive to do well based on the belief that he didn't have the incentive to do well in the first place. And you are now in the business of making kids wanna. I sure do hope you're right about why he's not doing well. Because if you're wrong and you're busy making a kid wanna, and he already does wanna, you run the risk of making things worse, or at the very least, not being as helpful as you might have wanted to be. I'm a kids do well if they can guy. I think if this kid could do well, he would do well. Something must be getting in his way. Your role just changed. Your role just changed. You've just flipped from thinking the kid isn't doing well because he doesn't wanna, and therefore thinking that your role in the life of this kid is to make him wanna, to something a lot harder, and in my experience, a lot more productive. You've just shifted to kids do well if they can, and what's your main role now? Figure out what's getting in his way, then you can help him. You can't help him if you don't know what's getting in his way. Biggest favor you can do a challenging kid is to finally, at long last, be the person who figures out what's getting in his way. Because you see, if he's still challenging, pretty surefire bet, nobody's figured it out yet. The key theme of collaborative problem solving, the key philosophy, if you remember nothing else from everything I say, I hope remember that if this kid could do well, he would do well, because kids do well if they can. I think if you're working with kids in general, but challenging kids in particular.
To advance the slide. All right. So it's really important that we're able to embrace, this basic premise that kids do well if they can, because our explanation for challenging behavior guides our intervention. So if we assume that children aren't doing well because they don't want to, or because they learn that their challenging behavior gets them something they want or helps them avoid something they don't like, or because of permissive, passive parenting, then our intervention is going to be about rewarding the behavior we like and punishing the behavior we don't like. But if we accept that the child could do well, he would do well, and that if the child had skills to exhibit adaptive behavior, then he or she would be, then we have a whole different perspective on things. And for children, doing well is always preferable to not doing well. So challenging behavior is not actually the problem that we want to be looking at today. Challenging behavior actually communicates. So to answer the question, what does the child need? We have to focus not on the behavior itself and making it stop, but actually what the child is communicating with this behavior. And that really is in sync with our Montessori training, because that's exactly how we're trained to view the child through observation. Is if something isn't working or a child isn't being successful, we ask ourselves, what does this child need? And what can I do differently to try to meet that need? Or in fact, if the whole classroom has an unproductive dynamic, we'll sit and observe our classroom and see what change we could make to the environment to try to solve the problem. So as Montessorians, we're already thinking in these terms, but it's just a slight tweak to focus not on the behavior itself, but to change our focus so that we're looking at what might be causing that behavior. And Dr. Greene uses a visualization that I really liked of upstream and downstream. And so, downstream is the behavior that we're seeing. It's the manifestation of a problem. But what's causing that behavior is upstream. It's actually an unsolved problem or a skill that hasn't been developed yet. And so that's where we want to focus on actually solving the problem. So Dr. Greene defines challenging behavior as occurring when the demands or expectations on a child exceed the child's capacity to respond adaptively. And I'm going to let him describe this in more depth.
Began noticing that I wasn't helping a lot of the kids that I was trying to help, or their families, or their teachers, or the people who were working with them. So I went back to the drawing board. I started doing something that I encourage lots of people to do. I started thinking about who these kids were, how they got to be this way, what they were about. And the explanation I came up with to help me understand their behavior better is this one. The child is delayed in the development of crucial cognitive skills, and the umbrella skills here are flexibility, adaptability, frustration tolerance, problem solving. There are a whole lot of other skills, but those are your umbrella skills, or has difficulty applying these skills when they are most needed. Keywords here: delayed development skills. What kind of skills? Thinking skills, cognitive skills. What kind of cognitive skills? Those crucial to being a flexible, adaptable human being, dealing well with frustration, solving problems. Those kind of cognitive skills. You see, I noticed something about 17 years ago. I noticed challenging kids aren't challenging every second of every waking hour. They're challenging sometimes, under some conditions, in some situations, under certain circumstances. I started noticing, what are those situations, conditions, circumstances, when there are demands being placed upon them for flexibility, adaptability, frustration tolerance, problem solving. I challenge you to think of any challenging episode that you can remember that occurred outside the context of demands for flexibility, adaptability, frustration tolerance, problem solving. And most folks have a great deal of difficulty coming up with anything. That's because that's when challenging behaviors occur. Stands to reason, if the only times challenging kids look challenging is when there are demands for flexibility, adaptability, frustration tolerance, problem solving, logic tells me it must be because these kids are lacking those skills. You see, this is a skills deficit orientation, not a motivation deficit orientation, and that is exactly right. You do something completely different when you think a kid is lacking skills than you do when you think a kid is lacking motivation. Those are two completely different looking interventions. What do you do when you think a kid is lacking motivation? You give him the incentive to do well because you thought he didn't have the incentive to do well in the first place. But what do you do when you think a kid is lacking skills? You teach skills. This explanation makes challenging behavior in kids out to be a developmental delay, a learning disability, which it is. No different than any other developmental delay. Kids who are having difficulty reading are having difficulty mastering the skills required for being proficient in reading. Kids who are exhibiting challenging behavior are having difficulty mastering the skills required for being proficient in handling life's social, emotional, and behavioral challenges. It's a developmental delay. Here's the cool part. When you treat these kids like they've got a developmental delay, like they're lacking crucial skills, when you apply the exact same compassion as you would with any other developmental delay, I find these kids get better. No, it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be fast necessarily, but they get better. Continue thinking of them as attention-seeking, manipulative, coercive, limit testing, unmotivated. I find they don't get better. I find they often get worse, just as a kid with a reading disability would if we decided that his difficulty was due to poor motivation, attention seeking, limit testing, coercion. This is the second pass at defining the function of a challenging behavior. According to the second pass, what is the function of a challenging behavior? Simple. It communicates to us that this kid doesn't have the skills to do it better. Because if he could, he would. All challenging behavior communicates to us is that the kid doesn't have the skills to do it better. Challenging behavior is proof positive that the kid doesn't have the skills to do it better, because let's face it, doing well is preferable to not doing well. But of course, only if you have the skills to pull it off. Began noticing that I was problem solving.
Oops. It says my screen sharing is paused. Hold on. Resume share. Can you still see the screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thanks, Brad. Well, this was really a radical idea to me, looking at challenging behavior of this sort as a learning disability or a learning difference, as opposed to something that the child is doing. It took all the judgment out of it for me. Certainly as a parent, I had suddenly this relief at being able to look at it in this way in which I wasn't a failure, my child wasn't a failure, really looking at it as something that can be taught and can be modified. And I found that in speaking with parents about their children in the school setting, that reframe is incredibly powerful for them as well, because parents coming into a conference with us to discuss their child's challenging behavior are feeling very defensive and embarrassed and maybe feeling aggressive. And so taking that view of seeing this as a developmental delay or a learning challenge takes that judgment out of things. And I wanted to point out those umbrella skills that Dr. Greene mentioned as being those that most challenging behaviors can fit underneath. When children are having trouble being flexible or adaptable, or having difficulty handling their frustration, or don't have problem-solving skills, that can account for 99% of the challenging behavior that we're seeing either in the home or in the classroom. So if we continue to think of children as manipulative or attention seeking or limit testing, we're limited in the way that we can respond. Instead, the goals of intervention with the collaborative problem solving approach are to figure out what those skills are that are lacking and then teach them. And to figure out what unsolved problems are precipitating the child's challenging episodes and solve those. And what's cool is that in the process of moving problems from the unsolved category to the solved category, we're simultaneously teaching the child many of the skills that she's lacking that then set the stage for the challenging behavior in the first place. So we want to move those skills from unsolved to solved. And before we talk about how to do this, I just want for a moment Ross Greene to acknowledge to us as educators how challenging this really is.
Good teaching doesn't mean treating every kid exactly the same. Good teaching means...
Hold on, that's not the right one.
Good teaching.
Oh, I must have lost that video. All right, so in the next point he makes is that as educators and as parents, we have to be responsive to the hand we've been dealt. So that doesn't mean treating every child the same. Many of us have heard that phrase. Fairness is not treating everyone the same. It's giving each child what he or she needs. And again, that's inherent to our Montessori training because we are trained to observe the child's readiness, the child's needs, and act accordingly with meeting the child's needs. But this is the way Dr. Greene talks about it.
Good teaching doesn't mean treating every kid exactly the same. Good teaching means figuring out what every kid in the classroom needs from you and making sure that they get it. Good teaching means making sure everybody gets what they need. Now I can't think of any place that is harder than in a school classroom. Harder primarily because there's a bunch of other kids in there, all of whom also have needs. In fact, being responsive in a school classroom means two things: being responsive to the needs of individuals while simultaneously being responsive to the needs of the larger group. That is very hard to do. And because it is very hard to do, sometimes it doesn't go well. And when it doesn't go well, people in classrooms often say to themselves, well, if I can't do both well, I'm going to do one well. The research literature tells us that mental health clinicians are much more oriented toward individual outcomes, and that classroom teachers are much more oriented toward group outcomes. So when doing both well doesn't go well, it's understandable that classroom teachers often pick the group and sacrifice the kid. A whole lot of kids are being sacrificed, lost at school, we could say, because their challenging behavior is not well understood, and because interventions are being applied that often make them look worse, not better, often make them look more like they don't belong in the group rather than that they do. When in fact, being responsive to the needs of individuals and being responsive to the entire group is, in my opinion, those are inextricably linked with each other. I can't separate the two. The things you do to enhance your group helps you work with individuals. The things you do to help individuals enhances your group. I can't separate the two, while acknowledging doing both simultaneously is hard. Good teaching doesn't mean.
So we spend a lot of time changing our lenses, accepting the premise that kids do well if they can, which changes our role to that of someone who wants to identify unsolved problems and lagging skills. So the collaborative problem solving approach utilizes a particular tool called the Assessment of Lagging Skills and Unsolved Problems, ALSIP. This was just updated in 2020. So the one we were using even last year is not totally current. I'm going to be putting this in the student support drive so that everyone has access to it. It's not radically different. It's just a little more streamlined. And we'll look at the two pieces. I have them blown up so you can see them in just a minute. When we're using the ALSUP in the school setting, this would be done collaboratively with parents and educators together in a meeting. The student would not be in this meeting. This is probably the only step that the student isn't a part of, but this is a collaboration with the family to identify these lagging skills and unsolved problems. So in filling it out, the first section is lagging skills. And together the group would check off all the lagging skills that they feel apply to this particular student. Now, it does not have to be unanimous. So if 2 out of the 5 people see something as a lagging skills and the others don't, it gets checked because that's something that we're going to delve into deeper. And if it seems like a particular child could have a really long list of things that they need to work on, that's okay. They probably do. The second section of the form identifies unsolved problems. And this is probably the part that changed the most from the last version of the ALSIP. The last version used the lacking skills as a prompt to develop or write down the unsolved problems. Instead, now they're giving you prompt questions to develop a list of what you think the most important unsolved problems are for this particular student. And there are some tips to writing down the unsolved problems. Again, we don't describe the behavior, and this is tricky because it's so tempting to say Johnny is hitting other children when he gets frustrated, and that's the problem. But we want to try and think about what the unmet need is or the lagging skill. It probably has to do with not being able to handle frustration or wait patiently or whatever that other skill is. We want to reframe the problem in terms of just the problem itself without tangling the behavior in there. We also don't want to include any adult theories. So if you find the word because slipping into your defined problem, stop right there. Just cross it out and put a period, because this is not the place where we're putting forward theories about why that might be. Another common temptation is to clump problems together and to say, Johnny's having difficulty with writing. Well, we know there are about 10 different components that go into writing, and we need to split all those apart, even if it makes our list longer, because what we'll probably find is not every component of writing is difficult for the student, but we want to drill down and find the specific pieces that are the most difficult. And similarly, we want to be very specific. So when we're defining a problem, as a group, you can all ask yourself W questions like, who is around when this problem is occurring? Where does it happen? What time of day does it happen? Now, we don't go to why at this point, because we're not trying to figure out the motivation, but we are trying to get as specific as possible. And if the committee kind of gets stuck, another great question to encourage specifics is to ask, what expectation is this child having trouble meeting? So then as these unsolved problems are listed and defined, it is impossible to take those on all at once. That's a recipe for failure, is to try and address all 5, 10, 15, 20 problems at the same time. So the group has to prioritize. And the top priority would always be safety first. So safety to the child, other children, the adults, anything that feels like a safety concern is your top priority. But also frequency can make a behavior a top priority as well. For example, which unsolved problems contribute to challenging episodes most often? And then gravity, meaning how serious those are, which unsolved problems have the greatest negative impact on the child or others. And then as a group, you're going to pick 3. And then those will be the first things that the group decides to work on with that student. Now, this is a cool tool that I had never seen before. This is how you keep track of what you've made as those top 3 priorities. And this is called a problem-solving plan. This is also on the website and part of this model and will be in the drive. So it's one sheet, but because it was hard to see everything in the one sheet, I blew up a couple of pieces of it. So you would identify those top 3 unsolved problems. And then for each one, you designate the adult taking the lead on that. Now that would be the adult who has the expectation of a particular thing of that child. The child's concern will be identified. We'll talk more about this soon. That's called the empathy step. The adult concern is identified, and then when it's happened, the solution that's been agreed upon is documented, and that would be sort of that through column on unsolved problem 1. Then you can work on 2 and 3. And if those get handled, you can take out another form and start working on some more. So once we've identified what the unsolved problems and the lagging skills are, then it actually comes time to addressing them. And this is where the genius of this model really shines through. So Dr. Greene defines the 3 types of behavior management approaches or discipline approaches as plans A, B, and C. And plan A involves solving the problem unilaterally. So the adult decides. Plan B involves solving the problem collaboratively and proactively. And plan C involves setting aside an unsolved problem for now. Not that it's not important, not that it's being abandoned forever, but it's not a top priority and it gets paused. So let's talk about each of these one by one. And then when we get to plan B, we're actually going to practice. But quickly, plan B is the adult imposing his or her will, making the decision, coming up with the solution. In other words, I've decided that. This is very familiar and convenient to many of us. It's how many of us were raised. It utilizes rewards and punishments because it assumes that the child is, exhibiting the challenging behavior in order to get something or to avoid something. And the problem is, is that it actually works in the short term. And it tends to work for non-challenging kids, even though they don't learn anything from it, but it can be an effective tool. Unfortunately, Plan A exacerbates challenging behavior in challenging kids quite often. Because having an adult's will imposed on you requires skills to handle that well, and those tend to be skills that challenging kids don't have. And it involves putting expectations on children who don't have the skills, or increases the likelihood of more challenging behavior. So it's a really counterproductive technique when you have a child who doesn't have those umbrella skills developed yet, to be flexible, handle frustration. So Dr. Greene talks about this, and this is a semi-lengthy clip, but I felt like he does such an amazing job describing sort of the pitfalls of Plan A that I thought it was worth watching.
If you are responding to a problem or unmet expectation in a kid, bottom line is you're either doing A, or you're doing B, or you're doing C. And if you're like a lot of people, you're doing A. A is when you impose your will. Now, very popular, the runaway bestseller option. It's where adults usually go when a kid isn't meeting their expectations. And a lot of us were raised on Plan A, and a lot of us think we turned out just fine, which means a lot of us ask the question, so what's the problem with Plan A? What's the problem with Plan A as a way to get the kid to do something you want? Well, now I'm going to divide the world for you. Challenging kids, not so challenging kids. What's the downside to Plan A in challenging kids? Plan A causes challenging behavior in challenging kids. Plan A causes challenging behavior in challenging kids. Why? What just happened? You just threw Plan A at a kid who doesn't have a Plan A brain. Why doesn't he have a Plan A brain? Having will imposed upon you, something most of us aren't all that keen on, requires skills to handle well. Many of them listed on the ALSUP. In other words, skills challenging kids don't have. If you throw Plan A at a kid who doesn't have the skills to handle Plan A well, the definition of maladaptive behavior has just been met, and you have just greatly heightened the likelihood of this kid doing something on the spectrum of behaviors that people exhibit when they don't have the skills to do better. It's very reliable, in fact. Rewind the tape. On the vast majority of challenging episodes in challenging kids, and what will you find? An adult using Plan A. Plan A causes, I thought we were trying to reduce challenging behavior. Plan A causes challenging behavior in challenging kids. That's a big downside. What's the downside to Plan A in a regular old kid? Whatever that means. Well, now I'm going to get philosophical with you. Plan A in a regular old kids have the skills to handle Plan A well. They're not that keen on it, but they've got the skills to deal. The downside is that if you're busy using a lot of Plan A, even with a regular old kid, you're busy teaching the kid that might makes right. And I think might makes right is the wrong turn human beings took a long time ago. Right doesn't make right. So if might doesn't make right, why are we adults so busy teaching kids that it does? It's convenient. Plan A feels convenient. In a regular old kid, Plan A can make something happen quickly. What's the price? Perpetual lessons on the might makes right principle. I want to spend just 2 more minutes on Plan A, just so people know what Plan A looks like, and just to put a little flesh on the bones. Plan A, once again, is when you impose your will. Now, plan A is such familiar territory to so many adults, so instinctive for so many adults, that they don't even know they're doing plan A when they're doing plan A. So let me give you an example of plan A. Kids, it's time to brush your teeth. That's not plan A. Many people think just because they have an expectation and they announce it means that they're doing plan A. No, your expectation is your expectation. How you handle unmet expectations is A, B, or C. If your expectations are being met, you don't need a plan. They're being met. Your three options, A, B, C, are for unmet expectations. Kids, it's time to brush your teeth. I'm not brushing my teeth. Now you have an unmet expectation. Now you have three options, A, B, C. Let's say you choose A. What comes out of your mouth? Something along the lines of, but you must. Plan A is when you say something along the lines of, no, or you must, or you can't. And just for the sake of clarity, you are most assuredly doing plan A if you say 1, 2, 3. I call that countdown to meltdown. Sometimes I call it meltdown deferred by 3 seconds. But it's plan A. Count me out on plan A. Count me out. What about plan C? If you are responding to a
So that brings us to plan C. I'm actually skipping plan B for a moment because if you haven't guessed, that's what we're going to spend most of our time learning today. But plan C involves just temporarily setting aside an unsolved problem for now. And some parents and teachers worry that this is about caving in or letting go of expectations. But in this case, we're going to consider it prioritizing. Moving something to plan C means it didn't make the top 3 on our unsolved problem list, and that we're just putting it to the side, and we'll get back to that later.
Skip it for now. Plan C is when you drop the expectation completely, at least for now. Now, many people hear plan C, drop the expectation completely, at least for now, and they think, oh, he means giving in. He does not mean giving in. Giving in is when you start with plan A and end up using plan C because the kid made your life miserable. That's giving in. But when you start with C, you've got a completely different mentality. Here's your mentality. You know, I know this kid. I know what skills he's lacking. I know what unsolved problems are reliably and predictably precipitating his challenging episodes. I know what my priorities are because I know I can't work on everything all at once. This thing that's still a problem is something I've decided not to work on right now. I won't even bring it up. That's plan C. That's not giving in. That's prioritizing because you can't fix everything at once. So just as an example, what might I use plan C for? And some of the very volatile kids that I work with, teeth brushing might end up with plan C. And many people have a great deal of difficulty thinking that the kids' teeth are going to be dirty. But if my options are as follows, I can push hard on teeth brushing now. Let's say this is my outpatient practice. I can push hard on teeth brushing, cause such a mess that I have to admit the kid to an inpatient unit about a half hour from now, or go with dirty teeth now, fry my bigger fish, solve my bigger problems, and then get back to teeth brushing once my big fish are fried. Well, that's the option I always pick because I really don't want to admit the kid to an inpatient unit over teeth brushing. Teeth brushing will go in C. I will clear some smoke, stabilize the situation, work on some of the bigger fish that I need to fry, and get back to teeth brushing when the kid and the system, whether it's his family system or his school system, are able. Homework sometimes finds its way into plan C. What about plan C? Plan C, once again, is when you drop the expectation completely, at least for now. What does that sound like? Kids, it's time to brush your teeth. Once again, you've done no plan yet because you don't know if this is a met or unmet expectation yet. I'm not brushing my teeth. Now it's an unmet expectation. You have 3 options, A, B, C. Let's say you choose C. What comes out of your mouth next? Okay. That's C. What have you just done? What have you just accomplished? You've reduced the likelihood of challenging behavior. Because you see, if you don't have the expectation, if you remove it, then the kid's not going to get upset about it. Now, I was actually modeling for you emergency C. But if you've prioritized already, and you've already decided that teeth brushing is not an expectation you plan to pursue at this moment, then you wouldn't even say, kids, it's time to brush your teeth. You wouldn't say it in the first place. It's been removed, at least for now. Skip it for now. Plan C is when.
So this brings us back to Plan B, which is what Dr. Greene is teaching us that we can implement both at home and in classrooms. And Plan B is proactive, it's collaborative, it's problem solving between child and adult, in which you find solutions to these problems that meet both of your needs. And why go this route? Well, the child is really showing us with the challenging behavior that she needs help navigating problems, regulating emotions. She needs help building these umbrella skills. I'm going to skip the next slide. Come on, wait. And, you know, we worry that when we drop an expectation such as teeth brushing in that example that we're caving, but Dr. Greene is not proposing that we don't have expectations for students or our children. Expectations are a good thing. In fact, you can't do Plan B unless you have expectations. The important thing is to make sure that they're realistic expectations for the child at this point in his or her development, and that you've prioritized your expectations and are working on these skills in manageable chunks. So there are two types of Plan B. Similar to the emergency situation of Plan C, there's an emergency Plan B. It's the version that you implement when you are in the situation, when things are heated. It's it's a form of crisis management. Where we prefer to be is to implement Plan B proactively, because the things that trigger challenging behavior happen so often, and we've identified what triggers them. They're predictable. So there's no reason we shouldn't be addressing these ahead of time and in essence doing crisis prevention instead of crisis management. And Plan B consists of 3 steps. So each of these steps, Dr. Greene is going to explain, and then we're going to stop, and as a group, we're going to practice each of these 3 steps, because this is really the heart of the technique. The first step is the empathy step. Second is defining the problem. And the third is what Dr. Greene calls the invitation. So I'm going to let him describe these.
All right. Here's the most important information of the afternoon, the 3 steps for doing Plan B. And whenever I start talking about the 3 steps, I tell people I have regrets. Regrets that I organize these as steps. Actually, I have mixed feelings about calling them steps. I like having called them steps because steps make it easier for people to do. I don't like calling them steps because it makes it sound very technique-y. So I personally these days would rather talk about ingredients instead of steps. But here's your 3 steps, if steps help you. First step is empathy. Second step, define the problem. Third step, the invitation. I don't even like what I called the steps. The reason I don't like that I call the empathy step is because empathy, while I am the first to say that challenging kids are deserving of our empathy, empathy is actually not the main ingredient of the empathy step. I don't have any idea what define the problem means, and no one else does either. And calling something an invitation is about as technique-y as it gets. So let me talk about ingredients instead. What's the main ingredient of the empathy step? Information gathering. All right.
So, information gathering. The empathy step involves gathering information from the child to understand her concern or perspective about a given unsolved problem. And Dr. Greene gives us a very specific script that we can use to elicit this information. So we're removing judgment, we're removing our own hypotheses about why anything is happening. We're not describing behavior exactly, we're noticing a problem. So we're making note of a problem that we've observed. I've noticed that, fill in the blank. And then the very simplest way to prompt a response from the child is your version of something like, what's up? Or can you tell me more about that? So even when you think you know why something is happening, during the empathy step, you enter with the assumption that you have no idea. You are only gathering information, picking an unsolved problem, dropping it in here, remaining neutral as possible because our goal is to get the child talking. We really want to get to an aha moment in which we feel like we truly understand what the problem is.
The goal of the empathy step is to gather information from the kid so as to understand his concern or perspective on the unsolved problem that we are trying to talk to him about right now. Information gathering so that we can understand is the main ingredient of the empathy step. What's the main ingredient of the define the problem step? Well, it's to define the problem step where the adult or the other party gets their concern or perspective on the table. And what's the main ingredient of the invitation? I wish I'd have called it the brainstorming step. This is where we're brainstorming solutions, but a certain type of solutions. Solutions that will address the concerns of both parties that we have now explicitly laid out on the table in our first two steps. Because I am so intent on having people do proactive B, I'm not talking about emergency B. I'm talking about proactive B. The empathy step of proactive plan B begins with a neutral observation. And these days I've been trying to be much more explicit about what words people should use. The words I usually use and encourage other people to use is, I've noticed that. Now what you're doing is you're plucking a problem from your list of unsolved problems and you're dropping it in and then finishing with what's up. Here's what it might sound like. I've noticed you haven't been too enthusiastic about taking your meds lately. What's up? I've noticed it's been really hard for you to get going on your social studies project lately. What's up? I've noticed you haven't been too enthusiastic about sitting next to Billy in circle time lately. What's up? I've noticed you haven't been too crazy about going to school lately. What's up? I've noticed whenever you and your brother play together lately, it turns into a fight. What's up? I've noticed bedtime's hard for us lately. What's up? I've noticed we've been struggling a lot about homework lately. What's up? See? You've got this list of unsolved problems. There was actually a reason that you would want to create that. You're plucking. You're saying what you've noticed. You are plucking an unsolved problem. You are dropping it in, and then you're saying, what's up? Now, the key to this observation is that it be neutral. Neutral is the key word. So in other words, you're not saying something along the lines of, I've noticed you're trying to ruin my life. What's up? I've noticed you don't care about your homework anymore. What's up? I've noticed you don't care if you get cavities. What's up? I've noticed you don't care if you do bad in school. What's up? I've noticed you're trying to disrupt my class. What's up? Not neutral. And what's the downside to not neutral? There's a lot of downsides to not neutral, but the biggest downside to not neutral is that it's going to shut the kid up. Not neutral shuts the kid up. And the goal of the empathy step is to get the kid talking. Because if you shut him up and he's not talking, then you are not gathering information. And if you're not gathering information, then you will not know what his concern or perspective is on the problem you would very much like to be solving with him, so it doesn't cause challenging behavior anymore. Does this make sense? The goal of the empathy step is to gather information on your social studies project.
Sorry.
Got your homework anymore? What's up? Be the total picture, which means you are now on the hook for drilling. Drilling for information. I'll give you an example of drilling, a true story. This one took place with me sitting next to a teacher for security, but her doing plan B all on her own. She just wanted me there just in case. She's sitting with a kid. Here's how it sounded. I've noticed we haven't seen much homework coming in for you lately. What's up? It's too hard. At each point along the way, what I'd like you to ask yourself is, do I yet understand? It's too hard. Do you yet understand? No. Start drilling. It's too hard. How's it too hard? It's too much. Do you yet understand? No. Keep drilling. It's too much. What part is too much? The writing part is too much. Ah, the writing part is too much. Do you yet understand? No. What about the writing part is too much? I don't know. Well, let's think about what homework you have, and then maybe we can figure out what part of it is the writing part that's too hard and too much. What type of writing assignments do you have for homework? Let's think about that. Well, I have spelling, but all I got to do is write one word. That's not it. What else do you have? Well, in social studies, all I got to do is draw a line from one word to another. Okay, what else do you have? Science. What about science? You're making us write entire paragraphs. Yes, I am. Is that the part that's too hard and too much? Yes. Do you understand yet? Not quite, but you're getting there. You're homing in. Help me understand what it is about writing the entire paragraph for science that's so hard. You know I'm a slow writer. I start writing and I can't remember what it was that I was going to say. And then I just get all mad and I say, forget about the whole thing. Now do you understand? Good job. Well drilled. And you certainly are a whole lot further than you were when it was too hard or too much. By the way, is that a legitimate concern? Want to know what I've learned about kids, both my own two and the thousands I've worked with? Kids have legitimate concerns. A few more tips here. Don't be a genius. Don't be a genius. Many adults, I might have alluded to this earlier, enter Plan B thinking they already know what the kid's concern is. This is an epidemic. Adults entering Plan B thinking they already know what the kid's concern is. It is fine to enter Plan B with some hypotheses about what the kid's concern is. Put them on the shelf. They are hypotheses. You are trying to enter Plan B with a blank mind, an open mind. You want to get the kid's concern on the table. Don't be a genius. A little bit more about the empathy step. Don't rush. What you're doing is you may even be making an appointment with the kid. This is not emergency B. What you want to do is create a 10 to 15 minute space to do some information gathering. And that 10 to 15 minutes also means that you don't have to rush. If it's emergency B, you're probably in a hurry, and there's a major downside to emergency B. Added heat. Added heat that makes it a lot harder to gather information. Added heat that makes it a lot harder to come up with a good solution. That's why proactive B is preferable. But here's the other reason proactive Plan B is preferable. You don't have to rush. You don't leave the empathy step until you feel as certain as you can be that you've got the kid's concern or perspective on the table. That's when you're done with the empathy step, which is why I so often tell people, if you're doing this for the first time, go into your initial Plan B with no agenda other than the empathy step. Keep the define the problem step and the invitation tied behind your back. All you're doing in your first foray into the Plan B territories is gathering information so that you can understand. And be prepared for surprises. You probably don't exactly know what his concern is. That's why you're doing the empathy step.
So we're going to practice trying to phrase our questions for the empathy step. It seems so simple, but it can be hard in the moment to think of exactly how to put it. So here are a couple examples. I've noticed that it's been difficult for you to brush your teeth at night. What's up? I've noticed that it's been difficult for you to stick with the 30-minute time limit on playing video games. What's up? So after I've noticed that, very often it works to say, it's been difficult for you to insert your verb there. And then you can ask your version of what's up. If you don't like what's up, it might be, tell me about that, or can you tell me more? So I thought we could practice a little bit with some classroom examples, and very informally. Let's just imagine a couple of scenarios. One being there's a student who's often putting work away before they've completed it, taking something out, working with it for a few seconds, and then putting it away. Is there anyone who'd like to take a stab at phrasing that as the type of question that you would use to introduce the empathy step? I may not be able to see all the hands, so just chime on in if you'd like to try it.
I would like to try.
Okay, great. Shweta.
Hi, Susie. I saw you were drawn towards the puzzle map, and when you were doing it halfway through, you just put it back. May I know why did you want to put it back? Is that okay?
Yeah. You noticed what you observed and asked for more information. Now, the younger the child, probably the less language you want to use. But that's the essence of it. So what about a student who's working with the same classmate every day, never wanting to do independent work, or other students are feeling left out, you're concerned about this? How could you ask the child about that? Does anyone want to give it a shot?
I've noticed that you're only working with James every day. What's up?
That's it. Yep. And, no judgment. It's just an observation, All right. What about a student who's interrupting lessons? And I intentionally threw a curveball in there by using the word interrupting, which is sort of a judging word. Can we think of a way to say, I've noticed that, in a very neutral way, to get at the heart of why a student is interrupting lessons? Anyone want to give it a try? Just chime in. I can't see all of your faces, so.
Could we say something like, I've noticed that you're speaking before your friends, and no, I don't know, delete.
How about I've noticed that you're having difficulty. So that helps me when I'm having trouble thinking of how to phrase it. Insert having difficulty with waiting until my lesson is over to ask me a question, or something like that.
Yeah, I think the trick is the difficulty word. I think that helps with the question.
It helps you get around the judgment part. Yeah, thanks, Marcella. Now, it could be a social situation. So let's say there's a student who's leaving out a classmate at playtime. I've noticed that, and you can insert, you've been having difficulty, if it helps you. Anyone want to try that one?
I have noticed that you like to play with two friends.
Mm-hmm.
What's up?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, can be as simple as that. I've noticed that you tend to play with so-and-so and so-and-so almost every day. What's up? Exactly. Yeah, just gathering information. Now we're going to go into this more in part 2 of this workshop later this year, but there are all sorts of different possible responses you might get at this point. Of course, if you're super lucky, the student says something really enlightened and totally explains to you, their motivation and their perspective on this whole situation. Probably not going to happen right off the bat. Probably going to say, well, I like Susie, or something that doesn't really get you all the information that you need. That's where we call on the technique Dr. Greene was calling drilling, not grilling, but drilling down and trying to get a little bit more specific about the information about the child's concern. We're going to practice that next time because there are lots of different tricks for good drilling. It's possible that the child is just going to say nothing, or I don't know. And that's okay. You can expect that. You don't have to feel completely deflated if that's the response. You can give the child time. Luckily, because you're doing proactive plan B and you're not in the heat of the moment, there is time to allow the child to reflect on it. You can even make an appointment to talk about it another time. I guess I've never asked you about this before. Take your time. We're not in a rush, or why don't we talk about this later this afternoon or tomorrow? The child might say like, well, I don't have a problem with that. They may not, admit to a concern. And you can use reflective listening here to ask for more information. Oh, so you don't feel that's a problem. I don't quite understand. Can you tell me more about that? Just try to kind of keep digging. The child might say, I don't want to talk about it. And we have to respect that too. This is another great time to make an appointment. I understand. Sometimes I don't feel like talking about things right away. Let's make a date to talk about this during, whenever it is tomorrow. The child might also become really defensive and say something like, I don't have to talk to you, or worse. And you can just respond with honesty. You're right. I can't make you talk. No, I'd love to learn more about your concern when you're ready. Whatever it is, just honoring that response. Eventually, by implementing this technique consistently, you earn children's trust, and they actually see that you are interested in finding out what their concerns are, and they'll tend to be more generous with you in sharing. But again, circling back, let's say you do feel like you've gotten to the heart of the matter, you understand the child's concern. This is another great time for active listening. So it sounds like, you're nervous about being called on in the circle, and that's why you don't want to come to circle time. Do I have that right? So make sure you really understand what the student's concern was and let them correct you if you're not quite there yet. All right, so once we understand the student's concern, then we're going to define the problem. This is step 2. And this involves communicating your concern or perspective about the same problem. So, hey, I understand that, you're nervous about coming to the circle because you don't like being called on. My concern is, or the thing is, I have really, exciting information that I like to share with you in this lesson. And I need you to have this information, or whatever it is that you want to say. So here it is that you're defining your concern. And Ross Greene says this better than I can.
Next step, you now have the kid's concern on the table. Time for your concern. That's going to be accomplished through the define the problem step, but now I wish I hadn't called it the define the problem step. I called it the define the problem step because in collaborative problem solving, a problem is defined simply by 2 concerns that have yet to be reconciled. The kid's and yours. Why is his concern going first? Because if your concern goes first, he thinks you're doing plan A, because that's what plan A sounds like. The goal of the define the problem step is to ensure that your concern or perspective is entered into consideration, possibly beginning with more words like, the thing is, or my concern is. What's the hardest part about this ingredient? The hardest part of the empathy step, the information gathering step, is drilling. That's the hardest part of the empathy step. And going into the empathy step with an open mind, without preordained notions about what the kids' concerns are. The hardest part of the define the problem step is that adults often don't know what their concerns are. Adults often know what their solutions are. But now you know that a solution is not a concern. A concern is a concern, a solution is a solution. You're not even talking about solutions until the third ingredient of Plan B. The first two ingredients of Plan B are reserved exclusively for concerns. And yet, here's what so often happens. The kid puts a solution on the table and the adult fails to drill. I'm not doing that. Then the adult joins in the fray and puts a solution on the table themselves. Oh, yes, you are. We don't have two concerns on the table now. We have two solutions on the table now. We are now engaged in something called dueling solutions, also known as a power struggle. Now, a power struggle is a unique type of activity. In a power struggle is a win-lose proposition. In a power struggle, you're trying to figure out who's going to win and who's going to lose. Collaborative problem solving is a win-win proposition. In collaborative problem solving, you're trying to come up with a solution that will work for both parties, that will address the concerns of both parties. But you can't possibly come up with that solution until the concerns of both parties are on the table. That, once again, is why the first two steps of Plan B are reserved for concerns, not solutions. You really don't know what problem you're trying to solve until there's two concerns on the table. Because adults have so much trouble figuring out what their concerns are, I've actually given the matter some thought. And I basically concluded that adult concerns usually can be fit into one of three categories, if you can believe it. All the things that you're concerned about could be fit into one of three categories. Here they are: safety, learning, how the behavior is affecting oneself or others. Fit. So if you're not exactly sure what your concern is, say one of those. What would our concern be on the kid who's doing no homework? Because as we have now learned, the writing part on the science is so taking him so long and is so frustrating that he ends up doing nothing. What is our concern about that? Might sound something like this. The thing is, if you don't do any writing for your homework, this is always going to be hard for you because you're never going to get any practice. Legit. Want to know what I've learned about us adults? We have legitimate concerns too. One thing you want to be wary of. Let's say you've put a lot of energy into doing the empathy step well, and you do it well, good for you. And then a lot of adults put a lot of energy into define the problem step, and they do it well, they get their concern on the table, and then what are they greeted with from the kid? I don't care. The air just went out of the Plan B balloon on that too. Many adults say, he doesn't care about my concern. Wait a second. Maybe he's well practiced at having other people not care about his. You reap what you sow. Plan A begets Plan A. Plan B begets Plan B. One thing I can tell you is that once you start caring about his concern, he'll start caring about yours. Next step, you now have.
So, examples of defining the problem step. And it's up to you whether you like the thing is, or my concern is, or some other version of that. But you want to make sure your concern is heard as well. So the examples I gave before, hey, I noticed, you haven't wanted to brush your teeth lately. What's up? So the next thing you could say is, the thing is, if you don't brush your teeth at night, the food you've been eating all day sits on your teeth and can cause cavities. It's uncomfortable having cavities filled. That's your concern. Or for that child playing video games, and not respecting the time limit. My concern is that all that time playing video games isn't making it easier for you to make friends, or limits you from getting outside to get exercise, or whatever your concern is. This is your opportunity to express your concern. So let's think about those same examples that we used a couple of minutes ago, for the student who was putting work away before completing it, and Shweta noticed, hey, I noticed that you're drawn to this particular work, but sometimes you're putting it away before it's finished. What's up? Can we think of a way to state the adult, or in this case, the guide's concern, and share that with the child. Does anyone want to take a stab at it? It would start with, the thing is, or my concern is, when you put the work away before it's finished, what is our concern?
I want to try the same thing.
Okay. Great.
The thing is, when I notice you putting your work away before finishing the puzzle map, that keeps me thinking if you had any challenges or if you felt it a little challenging. Do you want to share with me? I would try like this.
Yeah, now that sounds a little bit like drilling, like you're trying to get at what's happening with the child, which is important too. But what is actually why is it not okay with you for the child to put the work away before actually doing it?
I need help here. Like, this is my understanding. I feel like the child felt it was too challenging. So I have an option that I want to give the child, but it's a little like, do you want to continue it on another day? Or like, do you need some help? This is
And
what I want to ask the child.
yeah, and those are great options for when you get to the solution step. So you have all the ingredients, but this is tricky. That's why we're practicing. Can anyone help? Like,
Margaret.
how do we share what the adult concern is? Sonia, do you have an idea?
Yeah, I do that. I always say, I see that you're putting this work away every time you pick up. You really seem to like it. My concern is that you're giving yourself a message, you can't do it. And that seems to help a lot. I actually do that, and it seems to help. And then we dig into the problem, like what's going on, you know, and like they explain. But I've had this similar conversation several times today.
Oh, today.
So it's so fresh in my head. It's like, you're giving yourself a message that you can't do it. And that's my concern.
Interesting. Any other
I
ideas?
don't know.
I think I
There
want
are no wrong answers. That's fascinating. Marcel,
yeah, I want to delete my delete before. I will say the thing is that you're not having enough time. You're not giving yourself enough time to practice, and that's my concern. Right?
Yep.
So something on those lines.
Yeah, and that might be the concern. It could, and they're both right. It really depends on what your concern is. Sonia might be concerned that the child is lacking confidence, and so just puts it away before hitting any challenge level, and yet is unconsciously teaching herself, I can't do it. Or the concern might be the student is putting it away and not getting the practice that she needs to be ready for the next lesson. Or it could be she's putting it away so early that she's not even giving herself a chance to see if that's work she enjoys, or, whatever the concern is, that is what you insert. So thank you. Those were great examples. What about a child who's interrupting lessons? Let's see. And I think we phrased this as, I've noticed that you're having difficulty waiting until the lesson is over to ask your question. The thing is, or my concern is, does anyone want to try that one?
The thing is that when you talk to me in the middle of the lesson, it derails my train of thought, and it takes me 5 minutes to get back to the people I was already talking with. It's really hard.
Yeah. And I liked how you sort of invited empathy, for the child to feel empathy for your situation. It was not just your concern, but sort of like inviting them to see your perspective.
Margaret, my question is here, do we talk to the child only about the child, or is it about, because we do have children interrupting our lessons when we are giving it to somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
So can we say that my concern is that the other child is not getting my full attention?
Yeah.
Is that a valid, okay.
I think so, because just like when I'm giving you a lesson, I want to give you my full attention. You can think about how to say
Yes.
it, but when I give a lesson, I want to be able to give the gift of my full attention to
Okay.
whoever's receiving the lesson. I think that's fine, because we are helping children who haven't yet fully developed that part of their brain to feel empathy, to start building that muscle. So pointing out the impact on other people is just as valid. Now, they may not like bite on it quite as quickly as if the incentive was more personal, but I think it's important that our actions do have impact on others, and we're modeling that that's something we want them to care about too.
Okay.
Of course. Now, some children are so young, they're not going to be able to verbalize things as completely as in some of these examples, but I think it's worth modeling and practicing starting at a young age, and just sort of getting in the habit of this practice, because as the child becomes more verbal, you'll get more and more information. So the third step, after the child's concern has been identified, the adult's concern has been identified, this is called the invitation. Or as Dr. Greene said, he wished he'd called it the brainstorming step. But this is when you and the child discuss and agree on a solution that's mutually satisfactory to both of you. So let's think about how we can solve this problem together. Or I wonder if there's a way. When my daughter was a little younger, I used to say, let's be problem solvers. Whatever your little catchphrase is, that's how you'll invite the child to start brainstorming solutions with you. And if it pops up, this is Dr. Greene describing the invitation briefly.
Time for the third step, the third ingredient, the invitation, but I should have called it the brainstorming step. The goal of this ingredient is to brainstorm solutions together so as to address the concerns of both parties. This is very hard to do, especially for people who've only been thinking about solutions that work to address their own concerns. Coming up with solutions that address the concerns of both parties takes bravery, effort, and practice. The invitation lets the kid know this is something you're doing with him, not to him. It is crucial to let the kid know you are as invested in getting his concern addressed as you are in getting your own concern addressed. The minute he knows that, you got yourself a problem-solving partner. You got yourself a problem-solving buddy. Y'all are now the problem-solving team. This is not adversarial. This is not enemies. This is two people working together, slogging through mud so as to come up with solutions that address the concerns of both parties on the unsolved problem that has been causing challenging behavior in this kid for a very, very long time. My attitude, worth the effort, even if you're not very good at it yet. Even if you're not very good at it yet, better than doing something that has absolutely no hope of addressing the concerns of both parties and finally getting this problem solved. I'd rather people do lousy plan B than well-executed plan A, because I know that lousy plan B is just another step on the learning curve on the way to doing well done plan B. You got to do lousy plan B before you do plan B well. So be prepared for lousy. It's in your future if you want to do plan B. It's hard. All that lousy eventually adds up to experience, and experience ultimately adds up to you know what, I think I got this. But the first few times you do plan B, you're probably not going to be saying, I think I got this, unless you get lucky and it's seamless. I had a teacher look at me once and say, when am I going to be good at this? She said, what grade would you give me? She's only been at this for like 3 weeks. It takes longer than 3 weeks to get good at this usually. She said, what grade would you give me? I said, I don't grade. She said, well, what grade would you give me? I said, well, I wouldn't be grading for proficiency yet. You've only been doing this for 3 weeks. Right now, I would be grading for effort and bravery. Proficiency comes later. You're not going to get to proficiency until you get a high score. Time for the
So some examples of how you could phrase the invitation step. Let's think about how we can solve this problem. Or even more specific would be to insert the two concerns into the statement. So I wonder if there's a way to have you feel comfortable coming to Circle and make sure that you're able to be there for my lessons, whatever that might, or, do you have any ideas? Or I wonder if there's a way, now I'm blanking on examples, but addressing the child's concern, addressing your concern so that both parties are satisfied with the solutions. So the trick is that the proposed solutions have to be realistic. I find that children are really good at coming up with solutions that just are never going to happen. Like, well, I'll just never do that again, ever, something like that. And so, you might need to push back a little bit. Are you sure you can do that? Let's make sure we come up with a solution we both can stick with. The solution is almost never just try harder or I just won't. The solutions also need to be mutually satisfactory. Often the child will come up with a solution that meets his or her concern, but doesn't address the adult concern. That's developmentally appropriate. Again, their empathy is not fully developed, but that's where we're teaching. So we would say something like, well, that's an idea. And I know that idea would address your concern, but I don't think it would address my concern. Let's see if we can come up with an idea that works for both of us. And then you just bat it back and forth. You want the child to learn that you're just as invested in addressing her concern as you are in addressing your own. And that's when you'll actually gain a problem-solving partner. So we're going to look at an example of Plan B, sort of being role played. And this is if everything went perfectly smoothly, which of course it won't. And the next time we meet, we'll actually be digging into if then, like if this happens, then what do I do? But for now, since we're just learning the steps of the process, we want to see sort of in fantasy land what this would look like if everything went 1, 2, 3.
Okay, what you're about to watch here is what we might call basic, seamless, proactive Plan B. The purpose in showing you this is to mostly just show you what the 3 ingredients of Plan B would look like with nothing at all going wrong. So what you should be looking for here is the 3 basic ingredients. You're looking first for the empathy step. This is where the adult is trying to gather information so as to clarify the kid's concern or perspective on the unsolved problem that they're trying to work on. Second, the define the problem step. This is where the adult is trying to communicate their concern or perspective on the same unsolved problem. And last, you're looking for the invitation, which is where child and teacher are brainstorming solutions so as to try to come up with one that will address the concerns of each other. Let's see what that looks like.
Charlie, I've noticed sometimes when I'm teaching that you make noises. What's up?
I like to drum with my pencil.
Yes, I've noticed that you like to drum with your pencil. What do you like about that?
I just have to keep my hands moving. It helps me.
Oh, I see. So you feel like you need to keep your hands moving, and one way to do that is by drumming. Well, how does that help you?
It keeps me from talking.
I see. And that would be worse?
Yeah. I used to get in trouble a lot for talking. Drumming is better.
Oh, well, I understand. Is there anything else about the drumming you want me to know about?
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, see, the thing is, the noise of your drumming is distracting to me and the kids around you. Sometimes when I'm teaching, I forget what I'm going to say next because I'm paying attention to your drumming. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I wonder if there's any way we can keep your hands moving and keep you from talking so that you don't distract me or the kids around you. Do you have any ideas?
I don't know.
Well, that's all right. We're not in a rush. Let's think about that for a minute. How could we solve this problem?
I could type on my book instead of the metal desk, or something else that doesn't make as much noise.
Well, you could tap on your book instead. We could try that. I wonder if there's anything else that you could tap on that would be even softer.
I have that squishy thing that everybody wanted me to squeeze. If I tapped on that, it'd make even less noise in the book.
I remember that squishy ball that you had. Do you think that would work for you? I think that would work for me too. Why don't we try that? We'll see how loud it is.
Oh no. Sorry, everybody. See if I can get back to where we were.
I don't know. I have that squishy thing that everybody.
About it until we can come up with something that does work, okay?
Okay.
Come on, picture.
Okay, now if you're thinking that was fast, you'd be right. Plan.
Let's see if I can get, oh, that video is just not cooperating with me. I'm so sorry. Well, at least we got through all 3 steps. And you can see that that, of course, is an example based on a more traditional learning environment, not a Montessori environment, but it's a nice model of the 3 steps in a row. And what I particularly liked about it was that that guide was very good about not passing judgment. I mean, other than the word distracting, which does have kind of a negative connotation, and yet it was helping explain, you know, why that behavior was difficult for the teacher and classmates. In general, he did a great job of being really neutral about what he was observing. Another common mistake is not drilling down far enough to really pinpoint the problem. Again, we'll do more practice with drilling next time. And then another common mistake is defining both of the concerns, but then jumping in with a solution too fast rather than inviting the student to participate and be part of the brainstorming process. And I really like the way that that teacher didn't move too fast, really was okay with there being silence, let the student come up with some solutions. And of course, that was, you know, your best case scenario is that it's that easy to solve that particular problem, but you get the idea. So if we were going to walk through Plan B from beginning to end with one of our examples, let's just try that interrupting example. So I've noticed that you seem to be having difficulty waiting until my lesson is over to come ask your question. What's up? And then you drill and drill and drill and find out what it is. So it sounds like whatever this child has said. Do I have that right? Then when you feel like you've got the child's concern, you move into defining the problem and expressing your concerns. So the thing is, I find it hard to concentrate on the lesson that I'm giving, or I want to give the gift of my full attention to the student in the lesson, however you want to phrase that. And then the invitation, I wonder if there's a way that we can solve this problem and make sure that both of us are getting what we need. Do you have any ideas? And starting that conversation. This takes a lot of practice. And when we do get together again next time, we'll be practicing a lot of specific scenarios. If the child says this, you can try that. Or if you hit this particular wall, you know, go in this direction. But the purpose of today was really just to review and give an overview of the collaborative problem solving approach. This is something don't think we're meeting again until March. So feel free to practice with your children or your students over the next couple of months, even if it's only the empathy step. Like Dr. Ross Greene said, that can be enough of a challenge that it could be a great idea just to take the next couple of months to practice. I've noticed that, what's up? Or if you want to delve into defining the problem, the thing is, try it. And go as far as you like and just start experimenting with it. And then we're going to have much more sort of role playing and brainstorming and troubleshooting when we get together next time. What we have done, though, is just to review, the collaborative problem solving method involves changing our point of view to seeing challenging behavior as communicating, and communicating a child's lagging skills and unsolved problems. Then we use the ALSUP in collaboration with parents and other educators to identify those skills that are lagging and the unsolved problems. And then we go about addressing them. We teach those skills and solve those problems collaboratively with the child using Plan B. Hopefully it's a proactive Plan B, where we're not in the heat of the moment addressing an issue, but going at it ahead of time in a calm, quiet moment. Although emergency Plan B can certainly be pulled out as needed, it's just not as effective. And so I wanted to share with you some resources that are particularly helpful. So all of these video clips, the ALSUP, the problem solving sheet, all of these are free on Dr. Greene's website, which is www.livesinthebalance.org. And there's tons of other resources there as well.
Margaret,
Yes.
would you mind sending copies of the slides that include the ALSUP,
Yeah.
and the last slide that had all the steps on it, so we could
Sure.
just have something to look at?
You got it. In fact, I'll put the whole PowerPoint in the general drive. There's a student support folder in there, and I can share the link so you don't have to dig around for it. I'll put the whole PowerPoint. I'm also going to put the ALSUP and the problem solving worksheet in there so that you'll have all these resources because they are, I mean, he makes them all available to everyone for free. He just wants them to be used. And then if you're interested in reading, I mean, I absolutely love The Explosive Child. And in the introduction, Dr. Greene says he shouldn't have named it that because it's this approach and it works for every child. I mean, obviously this works for children with extreme behaviors, but in the example of a child who's putting work away before they're finished, I mean, that's not an extremely maladaptive, behavior that would require a therapeutic intervention. It's just a problem, so this technique can be used for anything from really, really significant to just really everyday problems. He wrote 2 books specifically about the school setting, Lost at School and Lost and Found. I'm in the process of reading those now. But they look like amazing resources. But if you do nothing else but just visit that website, I don't think you'll be disappointed because there's tons there. And thank you, Sharon, because I will put all of this in the general drive and I'll send out an email with a link just so you know where to find it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So of the three books, do you have a best recommendation if we wanted to pick one to start with?
Well, I'm not sure it's fair since I haven't finished the 2 about school. The Explosive Child is definitely geared towards it's written towards parents, although it's the exact same technique that you use if it's your child or if it's a student. So I don't think it really matters. But if you want to read something from the teacher's perspective, then either Lost at School or Lost and Found. And I know he revised and updated one of them. I'm not really sure what the difference is. That's on my to-do list before March, is to read both of those and kind of see which one I can recommend more than the other. Loved Explosive Child though. What other questions or comments? I can stop sharing my screen so we can see each other. Any thoughts, stories, questions? Anyone wants to share anything you want to make sure we cover next time that would be helpful?
I just want to say I've done it several times with Betsy. We did it, and I feel like each time is new.
Mm-hmm.
Like we always need to revisit and learn the wording and practice and practice and practice and practice and practice, because like for me, and because I'm not in contact with the same kind of students all the time, and I don't have direct contact permanently, it gets lost in translation. Like, so yes, it's important to practice, and if we can watch more than once, it's ideal.
Yeah, I actually wrote, I've noticed that what's up, the thing is, can we figure this out together, like on cards, and stuck them to my fridge, you know, because sometimes in the heat of the moment, like my mind will just go blank. And granted, you want to be proactive, but I'm trying to be consistent too with my daughter and use the language proactively, but then in the moment also, and I will just go completely blank. So I have my refrigerator cheat sheet handy, and it does take a lot of practice for it to become automatic. I'm still not great at it. But my daughter has at least learned to expect the how are we going to solve this problem together part. And she'll say, I'm a problem solver. And then she'll suggest that we eat dessert before dinner or whatever it was that she wanted to do anyway. So it's a work in progress. But she has the idea that she's a problem solver. So it's coming. Anything else we want to make sure we cover next time?
Can we talk about what to do? What should the next steps be if the child doesn't keep, his promises or whatever?
Yes.
He has to if he has found a solution and he doesn't follow it through.
Right. They don't stick to their part of the bargain. Okay.
Yeah.
That definitely happens.
Yeah, but I really need that right now. But okay, I can wait for 2 months.
Okay, we'll talk tomorrow. Something that I see for the guides also is how to, like, we are guide and child, but sometimes the middle part, that is the parents, are totally disaligned or out of tune with what we are doing. So when we're bringing the first conversation and the diagnosis, right? And when you're describing the problem and trying to understand with the parent, there's a lot of emotion there. And it may be offensive when we said, we have noticed that your child puts his work away and don't complete it. Oh, you're telling that my child is lazy, right? So how to deal with the parents, because sometimes the parents are the barrier between the child and the progress.
Mm-hmm. And this can be done in isolation. I mean, it's something that can be a classroom strategy only if you're, worst case, not in partnership with the parents, despite your best efforts. It's still something that you can implement in the classroom and at school. But as you said, ideally, there's alignment and consistency between home and school. And so I do think we have a lot of education to do. If this is something we can get good at and we want to sort of implement as our kind of go-to strategy school-wide, then I think we need to do some parent education on it as well. But I think that you have the best chance of not triggering defensiveness in parents with the I've noticed that. And if you're not filling out the ALSIP together, if you're just kind of reporting back to the parent, using that language works. I've noticed that so-and-so shies away from challenging work. I asked her about it. We kind of drilled down and she indicated that it's because da 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 da. So we came up with a solution together that we thought would work. And, here's what we came up with. You can be just sort of reporting in as opposed to asking for them to be part of the process if that's not going to happen. I mean, I suppose you could use this with parents too. I'm noticing that Johnny struggles with da da da.
Yeah, I've noticed that you don't care about what would you hear that now.
Notice that you haven't attended our last several conferences. What's up with that? Yeah, it's worth a try. Well, thank you, everyone. I really appreciate your time when I know you have so many things to do. I'll send out a follow-up explaining everything that's in the drive and how to find it. If you think of other things, other good ideas, questions we can cover next time, please do, and we'll do more practicing. But please practice on your own and sort of next time report in on anything that you tried, and you can use each other as kind of a support group. Share your successes and your failures until we meet again. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.